called Chandler Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and there's that Cumberland Presbyterian, and when you hear that, a lot of people are, wait, what? I remember, you got to hear the story from seminary. The first time we met Roman, we had our very first class. It felt like years ago, but it was just about 4 years ago maybe. We had our first class, and I was in my Chaco spell. You guys remember me and my Chacos, right? I wore them all year round. Well, me and Holton somehow accidentally wore the Chacos the same day, and Roman thought being a Cumberland Presbyterian meant you had to wear Pacific sandals. It's true. Just kidding. But yeah, that's how that started. But no, one of the things that I think today is, before we get into the sermon, when I think about our church and our denomination, one of the neatest factors of being a Cumberland Presbyterian is the connectedness, the interconnectedness between the churches. That not only, like when we go to, where we see this the most is at our church camp programs. When we go to church camps, we have like this miniature community of staff and students who, there's just this connectedness. And if you were a youth, if you look back thinking about your convocation experiences and your church camp experiences, you feel this greater connectedness that happens, and it happens all the way around the world. The Cumberland Presbyterian Church is unique in that a lot of churches, a lot of denominations are only based in the country that they're located. For instance, there might be a Methodist church in America, but then there might be another Methodist organization in a different church, meaning that it's its own kind of separate entity. But Cumberland Presbyterian, if you are a part of the denomination in a different country, you're part of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. There's not just a geographical, this is for this denomination. And that's kind of unique as well. But one of the things that I like is I think of the time going down to Columbia. We walked in there, and there was just this automatic thing that connected us, and it was just because of how the denominational ties run. And so that's something we don't think about, and that's something we don't understand. And what's really cool is, even in Columbia, guess what? You know how you know you're in a Cumberland Presbyterian Church? If they sing the doxology. They did that in Columbia, and I was like, oh, I know this song. So that's just there. But anyways, I wanted to just kind of share, to remind us that, we do have a heritage, and not to forget this. This week I went and read in the bulletins you saw where we had an archive, where it's talking about the archive and giving it, and they have a list of ministers who have gone on. And it is, when I was just reading through there, I got kind of the sense of just kind of like this, there's this legacy of people who have gone and been faithful and preached, and if you stop and think about the list of ministers, even in his own church, that there's this legacy of the gospel that needs to continue going forward. And I hope that sense, and just us remember that with all that, this is all for the glory of Jesus Christ, everything that we should say and do, and that we're all seeking one thing. So let's go ahead and get into the sermon this morning. We're going through the Exodus, and this morning we're talking about Moses flees to Midian. But before we get there, I want to read a story to you, and this is what happened. Several years ago, one evening, a woman was driving home when she noticed a huge truck behind her that was driving uncomfortably close. She stepped on the gas to gain some distance from the truck, but when she sped up, the truck did too. The faster she drove, the faster the truck drove. Now scared, she exited the freeway, but the truck stayed with her. The woman then turned up a main street, hoping to lose her pursuer in traffic, but the truck ran a red light and continued the chase. Reaching the point of panic, the woman whipped her car into a service station and bolted out of her car screaming for help. The truck driver immediately sprang from his truck, ran toward the car, opened the back door, and grabbed another guy who had snuck into her car and dragged him out of the car. See, the woman was running from the wrong person. From his high vantage point, the truck driver had spotted a person hidden in the back. The chase was not his effort to harm her, but to save her, even the cost of his own safety. Likewise, many of us run from God, fearing what he might do to them. But God's plans are for good, not evil, to rescue us from the hidden things that endanger our lives. Going into that, let's open up our Bibles. We're going to be in Exodus chapter 2, starting at verse 11. Now last week when we got here, we ended with the birth of Moses. And today we're going to start right here. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." So this morning, we start out in our passage this morning, and what we see is we see Moses had a sense of who he was. He knew, that I'm adopted. He understood that his people, he realized that he was a Hebrew. And he went out and he looked around and he saw something that caught his eye. He saw an injustice that was taking place. He saw something that was not right. He saw that his people were enslaved. He saw that his people were being beaten, and he decided to take things into his own hands. And when we hear that, we go, "Well, what's wrong? What's so wrong with that? What's so wrong with when we see something wrong, going about it and taking action and doing something?" And here's something that I'm going to go ahead and say. If you claim to be a follower of Christ, if you claim the mantle of being a Christian, remember this: even if you are right, if the situation is handled without love, it still makes you wrong. So many times we go, and when we're dealing with other people, and we're dealing with one another, that when we see things and we react, sometimes we don't go, "Well, what's the best way of acting?" Because, see, I think that when we see something that is wrong or unjust, yes, we should take action. But at the same time, the action that we take should still honor and glorify God. Correct? And so this becomes this dual thing that must take place within us. It becomes kind of a dichotomy, 2 points of the same coin, and said, I must take action when I see wrong, but at the same time, I must also show the love of Christ. And it becomes this thing that when it becomes working with one another, I remember one time I was dealing with a gentleman at a church once, and we were going, and he got really upset with someone else in the church. I mean, really upset. Here's the deal. I did not know that he was really upset because I did not know situation A had even happened. So I did what I usually do. I go over and I go help him out. He was going in the shop and tinker around, and I went over to his house one day, and we were sitting there and we were going, and all of a sudden we were goofing around, and I said something, and he just came unglued on me about the situation that I had nothing to know about. And I went and I walked away there, and he lit me up, and he had no idea what I knew, but he just yelled at me and screamed, and I left. And I remember, and someone goes, well, he was just a little bit upset, and that's when all of a sudden it hit me. And I said, well, I understand that he's upset, and he has every right to be upset, but even if he's upset and if he doesn't react out of love, he's still wrong. You could be exactly right in the way you think and the way you feel, but if you handle it the wrong way, it still makes you wrong. And we see that with Moses when he sees this, and he goes up there and he sees this injustice. He goes, I must do something about it. He goes up to the guard, and he looks around, and he knows he's about to do something wrong. Do you know how I know he knows? Because he looks to see if anyone's watching. I believe John Wooden made this claim, according to what I can find. It says, the truest test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching. You know, that's true. The truest test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching. Right there, that's convicting, and that's going. But he looks around and he goes, well, no one's watching. No one's seeing what's about to happen. What's it really going to hurt? You know, that's kind of how sin tempts us. It's like, well, no one's watching you. You can get away with that. You can pull that off. It's not that bad. You need this. You want this. Go for it. And all of a sudden you look around and go, well, no one's watching. That's what Moses thought. He goes, well, no one's watching. And we see in the passage that afterwards he does this and he kills this guard, and he thinks no one saw him, that he's in the clear. And then he walks over and then he sees two of his fellow Hebrews fighting, and he goes up to them and he's like, hey, stop fighting. And all of a sudden look at him and they go, who are you? What are you going to do? Kill us just like you killed that man? Obviously, someone saw what was happening. See, I think a lot of times when we have this attitude, well, no one's watching, here's the thing. If you claim to be a Christian this morning, go, I follow Jesus, I go to church, what you've done is that you've painted a bullseye out into the community that they look in, and all of a sudden they watch everything you say and do. And sometimes we shock people. Wait, what? Right? Sometimes people are like, well, wait a minute. I remember one of my greatest feelings is when you get into conversations or you're talking with someone about Christ or something's happening in the community, and all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute. And they go, well, wait a minute here. Where they believed something about Christ that was not really that's not really about Christ, and they realize, they're like, wait a minute. Like for instance, Daniel, who is down at Bethel, all that stuff. When Daniel came around, he had a certain perception of what being part of a Christian community was like. He comes to church camp, but at church camp he realized, well, wait a minute, Christians can laugh and have fun and all that stuff? And I was like, no, you can never laugh again. That did not work. But he had this perception that all Christians were just these old fuddy-duddies who didn't know how to smile or even laugh or have a good time or be there for one another. He just had this misperception, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. But what happens when we start going, there's no perception, and that's the thing that we need to realize is that when we're together and we're outside of this church, that A, we represent Christ, and B, we represent the community of faith that we belong to. That there is a perception that this church has out in the community, and this church has been in this community for a very long time, and I guarantee you that there's a lot of perception out there, but I also think that this church has the potential to be seen as a church that loves people. And we need to continue that, and we need to continue going forward. How I know is we had such a great turnout for the rummage sale this last week. We had people donate, and I don't even know what I'm allowed to say about this, so I won't say much, but we had people donate some money on there that they just go, I need to donate this, I feel that I need to do this, and they did that out of the love of their heart because they feel like this was a church that gives back to the community, that is working in the community. And that's something that we need to think about at the church moving forward, is looking at going, well, how are we being perceived in the community? Are we being perceived as a church that cares and loves one another and loves the community? Are we seen as a church that likes to fight and argue and bicker and to blah all the time? Or what are we going to be a church of? And that is something that we as an individual have to make decisions, because I want to be a church that loves and glorifies Jesus, and I want people, when they look at our church, I want them to see the love and the community and the things that I see in you guys. That's what I want them to see, because I've been here for about going on 5 years. Do you guys realize it's almost been 5 years? I'm sorry that you've put up with me for 5 years. But I just want you to know there's a reason why I love this church and love this community of faith. It's because I've seen it at its best and I've seen it at some of its worst. And the thing is that, you know what? There's a lot of love here if we just let it out. Moving forward, I don't know how we got there. That wasn't even in my notes, but so Moses, who thinks, well, nobody sees me, what happens is God saw him, the victim saw him, and sometimes the victim is ourselves. Put that in there. And there's the unseen seen person that sees. Let me say that again. The unseen person sees. All these people saw what he thought that he was hidden, and that's the thing. If you're going to be a child of the kingdom of light, you're going to be exposed. Let me ask you this. I tell my youth kids all this all the time, they're desensitized to it, but I don't think you guys are yet. But if up on the screen, we would actually put your junk and your dirt that you want no one else to know on that screen right up there, do you feel like you'd be able to show up next Sunday morning and just kind of like, hey, nothing happened? Would you feel that way? Or would you feel embarrassed? Or how would you feel? See, one of the things that I think about as a church is that we also need to be a place that we need to be able to go, that if people who are struggling, is like if we can't deal with our struggles, if we can't come along aside one another and deal with the junk, if we can't do that, if we can't create an atmosphere that we can feel like, hey, I'm going through some things right now, I got some stuff going on, I'm working through this, that if we don't create a safe place for people to really find God, then what makes this any different than a social club? Something to think about. So Moses, who comes out there, he sees these two, and he comes up there and he sees them fighting, and he looks at the one in the wrong, and he goes, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? Why are you doing this wrong? Why would you be hitting one another? You guys are from the same people. And I look at him, and all of a sudden what we see is we see this puffed up, prideful Moses going, well, you know, he's just sit there and murdered somebody one day, and the next day he's trying to tell everybody else, well, this is how you should be doing it. Because, you know, it's super easy to point out other people's junk, to focus on other people's shortcomings than it is to work on our own. Think about that for a moment. And we come in here, and we get to this place, and we see Moses, who's all puffed up on pride, trying to tell other people, hey, you're sinners, you're messed up, you're a mistake, and pointing out all the wrong. And what he needs to focus on is like, I just killed somebody. And he doesn't even catch that. It's not even nowhere in this. And I think sometimes we forget that as a church, is that, you know, a lot of times I don't necessarily always have to tell people, hey, you know what you did wrong, right? A lot of times they do know what they did wrong. But, again, there are people that shock me that they just don't know. They just don't know. In a lot of our youth programs, a lot of times there's just a lot of our kids, they did not know that was something they could not do. And I think that, but when it comes to this, you know, sometimes we think that it's our job to point out that people are sinners, but I don't think that's what it is. What our job is to point people to a Savior that loves and who heals sinners. Because all in all, here's the deal. We're all fallen short. We have all sinned, and we have all messed up. And the difference between a Christian sinner and a sinner is this. A Christian sinner is one who is of Christ but still struggles with sin. Then just a sinner would be someone who has not accepted Christ yet. That's the difference. One has Jesus, one does not yet. That's something to think about. So he walks up there and they look at him and they go, Moses. He goes, didn't you? He goes, then Moses, when we're at verse 14, the man said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. And we're starting at verse 16 now. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." So when we get to this point in Moses' story, we see where Moses had this spiraling effect in his life. He had this moment to where everything just spiraled out of control to the point that he had to flee for his life, and he runs away, and all of a sudden he ends up almost starting a whole new life, doing the start over. And sometimes I think that we get to a place where we go, well, this is as far as I can go in my Christian walk. What else can I do? And the thing is that, you know what? Every single person that is sitting here this morning that is not sitting here, guess what? We all have a place and we all have something that God's calling us to do right now, at this moment. We have a purpose and place, and we preach, and I've preached on this recently, that each and every single person belongs to this body. There's something that they bring to the table. You bring something to the table. And when we come here, and we come here in this passage, and we get to this point, Moses comes out here, and this could be the end of Moses' story. But we all know, if we all know what happens, what's coming next. We all know the story of Moses being called in the burning bush. We know this story. We know what's about to happen next. But what happens if we didn't know? See, sometimes we don't realize this, but God has a game plan next. That God has something that's next. Sometimes what we don't know is that God has something in store. That God is the orderer of the chaos, so to speak. That when we come here and we see this, this is not the end of Moses' story. It's only the beginning. It's only a part of the beginning. It's still at the beginning. See, what happens is sometimes we feel like this was God, where we feel like we flee from God, that we've gotten too far, and we go, well, that's it. But the truth of the matter is, and when we come to this moment, when we look at this passage, is that it doesn't matter how far you flee from God, because I believe God to be right there going, look, I'm still here. That God is someone who pursues, that God is someone who will go after, just like the story that we read at the very beginning with the truck driver and the lady in the car. God sees the dangers of our life and is there trying to get rid of all those things that we cannot see. That God is there orchestrating, that God is there moving in ways that you and I cannot fathom. The point that I want you to get this morning is that God is there, because I want to read this to you, and I want you to read this. And when I read this part of the passage, it came to light in a way that I've never felt, because this is God's love for His children. This is God's love for you and me. This is how God sees us. And let me go through here, starting at verse 23. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and He remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Whatever you're going through today, whatever you're going to be going through tomorrow, you're not forgotten in God's sight. No matter how far you flee, no matter how far you can run, you're not forgotten in God's sight. And when I read that, what I read was that God saw the groans of the Israelites, that God hears the suffering, and that God remembers us, that we are not forgotten, God sees your current suffering, and He's walking right there with you. You are not forgotten to God. He has not abandoned you. He has not forsaken you. And we go throughout the next week, I want you to remember that. I want you to hold on to that, because that is part of the gospel message. That is a promise that we can take. That is something that when I think that when God says that He'll never leave us nor forsake us, that is something that is beautiful. Because you know what? And if we're really honest, we've all messed up so many times that sometimes we can even just go, I wonder why God still puts up with us. And thank you, Jesus, for dying on the cross. That's all I can say about that. So this morning, as Roman comes forward, we'll go and we'll sing our last song. And whatever you're going through this week, whatever's happening to you, wherever you're at, however far you've fallen, whatever's going on, whatever's going to come up this next week, remember, God is with you.